What if I told you that almost every one of Jesus' apostles died in ways more shocking than you've ever heard, and that historians aren't so sure the stories are true? What really happened to Jesus' 12 apostles after the New Testament ends? Tradition says nearly all of them were brutally martyred, Peter crucified upside down, Bartholomew skinned alive, Thomas speared in India, or so the legends claim. In this video, we'll uncover the real stories, comparing ancient traditions to what skeptical historians say. Let's dive in and separate history from legend. Peter, the outspoken rock fisherman turned apostle, is said to have gone to Rome under Nero and, feeling unworthy to die like Christ, requested to be crucified upside down. Church tradition places this around 64 AD, painting a vivid image of Peter's final act of humility. Historians agree Peter likely died a martyr in Rome, but there's no first-century source describing an upside-down crucifixion. Andrew, Peter's brother. Known for his bold faith, Andrew would meet his end on an X-shaped cross in Patras, Greece. Church tradition tells us Andrew was bound to this cross, not nailed, and preached to the crowds for 2 days. For Andrew, death was not defeat, it was testimony. Skeptics say Andrew's X-shaped cross and long sermon only appear centuries later in legends, not in the earliest records. And now, we turn to James, whose fate was one of the first to be recorded. James, the brother of John, became the first apostle to be martyred, executed by the sword under King Herod around 44 AD. Skeptics note James's death is barely mentioned in Acts. Most details come from much later traditions. Now, let's turn to Philip, another apostle whose story takes a far darker turn. Philip, the apostle who boldly preached in foreign lands, is said to have been crucified in Hierapolis, facing death with unwavering faith. Skeptics say Philip's crucifixion is legend. Early records don't even mention how he died. Now, we turn to Bartholomew, whose story is one of the most brutal of them all. Tradition says Bartholomew was flayed alive in Armenia, his skin stripped from him for preaching the gospel, one of the most horrifying martyrdoms in church history. Skeptics argue Bartholomew's gruesome death comes from much later legends, with no early historical evidence to back it up. Now, we come to Thomas, whose story takes us all the way to India. Tradition says Thomas traveled to India, boldly preaching the gospel, until he was pierced through with spears, sealing his faith in blood. Skeptics point out that Thomas's spear death only appears in late traditions, with no solid historical record from his lifetime. Next, we look at Matthew, whose fate is surrounded by conflicting traditions. Tradition says Matthew preached in Ethiopia, where he was stabbed to death while celebrating Mass, a martyr for the faith he proclaimed. Critics note Matthew's death is tied to late traditions, with no early evidence for the dramatic Ethiopian martyrdom story. Now, we turn to James the Less, whose death is one of the most brutal in church tradition. Tradition says James the Less was thrown from the temple, stoned by an angry mob, and beaten to death with a club, dying as a steadfast witness of faith. Historians argue James's violent death is based on conflicting late sources, making it hard to separate fact from legend. Tradition claims Jude preached in Persia, where he was beaten with clubs and beheaded, sealing his witness with blood. Historians argue Jude's martyrdom lacks early sources, and most details come from much later traditions. Next, we come to Simon the Zealot, an apostle whose death is wrapped in even more uncertainty. Tradition says Simon the Zealot was sawn in half for his faith, a brutal end that marked his unwavering loyalty to Christ. But historians say Simon's death varies wildly. Some accounts even place him peacefully in Persia centuries later. Now we come to Matthias, the man chosen to replace Judas, and his death is just as debated. Tradition says Matthias was stoned and then beheaded in Jerusalem, paying the ultimate price for his faith. But historians note that Matthias's death is entirely based on late traditions, with no early evidence at all. Now, let's look at John. The only apostle in tradition says lived to old age. John, the beloved disciple, is said to have outlived them all, exiled to Patmos, where he wrote Revelation, before dying peacefully in Ephesus. Skeptics say there's no solid proof John was on Patmos. Some even doubt he wrote Revelation. His peaceful death, they add, is only tradition. From Peter's upside-down cross to John's peaceful end, these stories blur the line between faith and history. Which do you believe?